Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Smuggling Hope podcast. Today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about panic attacks, panic, and what that is. And if you're experiencing that, or you know somebody who's experiencing that, simple things you can do to really mitigate and reduce those symptoms, and also do things to really ensure that that doesn't continue to happen. So, Smuggling Hope podcast is dedicated to bring Catholic counsel to the community. We want people to have access to information that makes a difference in their everyday functions, their relationships, helps them to navigate, obviously, the ongoing stressors in our world, in our marriages, in our families. Some of this stuff is obviously happening to affect our mental health as well as our relationships, and want to continue to produce high quality content. And in order to do that, like your support is always really valued. So the best way you can support the podcast is to hit the subscribe button if you're on YouTube or on Spotify or Amazon Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. So you hit the subscribe button. If I'm doing an okay job and I deserve a 5-star review according to you, well, that'd be awesome too. Everything bumps up the algorithm and allows people to recognize this content, and I'm very helpful. I'm grateful for all of the support and the encouragement from the audience and those individuals that have continued to be of support and provide either questions or thoughts on this podcast, to generate future episodes. So I really do appreciate that. And if you want to contribute in any way to the podcast, I know people have been very, very kind to me. One of the supports that's helped me a great deal is the graphic design team over at Mezzanine Creative, and that's in the show notes. So if you want to go to mezzanine.co, right? MEZANINE.co. The people over there will do a wonderful job with graphic design for your small business and branding. The other support of this podcast comes from the Buffalo Chesterton Academy. You can go to buffalochestertonacademy.org to check out what the school is, and that is a Catholic high school in the classical. I always do this backwards. It's a classical high school in the Catholic tradition. Right, so developing the character, the intellect, and the spiritual life of young people, and so teaching them to think in a world gone mad. So very, very, very positive experience that my children have had through Chesterton. If you're looking for a Chesterton Academy near you, there will be a link in the show notes to look for a Chesterton near you. What makes Chesterton different than, I would say, like mainstream Catholic education is the primacy of the spiritual life and the formation of character, teaching people to really think about who they want to become and moving towards that, and also teaching them how to think. Traditional school only satisfies 2 of the 4 core needs of the individual. So there's 4 needs of the human person. There are what we call our primary survival needs: food, water, shelter. The second is our what we call agency needs. Agency needs mean that I can afford to buy nicer clothes or a car or whatnot, or to take a vacation. That's an agency need, something that I can actually make a greater choice, right? But the other 2 are never really addressed in school at all. And so that is, the need for friendship and relationship, to master that, to develop relational skills, which is a super powerful thing. And the other one, the last one there, is the spiritual need, right? And that is the need for meaning. And right now, when people ask me, well, what is one of the biggest crises in our world? It is a crisis of meaning. Everybody thinks that everything is important, and if everything is important, nothing is. And so even in the United States right now, as we go towards our election, people are fighting over preferences in many ways. They're not thinking about what actually matters. Sometimes that is really worth reflecting on. So Buffalo Chesterton, definitely a great support of this podcast. And then lastly is Hearts Renewed. And if you go to heartsrenewed.org, you can take a look at the online program. I'm there for marriages, to transform your relationship with your spouse, whether you have been married for 40 years or 4 months, whether you're preparing to get married or you're contemplating divorce. Check the program out. It encompasses everything from communication to emotional regulation to dealing with patterns that you feel like are unbreakable, problems that seem that they're never going to stop. That program will break down how you can build the marriage of your dreams, connect to the people that said I do. And it is designed to give you positive conversation with every step and to give you concrete examples and application to make sure that you're getting, at every turn, right, very practical and hands-on interventions that you will do with your spouse in the privacy of your own home. These are things that in many ways couples counselors just for whatever reason don't do at all because they're the guru. And so what we've removed the guru for you, it is you and your spouse, and you will do it at your own pace. So there's no excuses. I got a lot of people that make a lot of excuses about why they can't work on their marriage till it's too late. Don't do it. Just take advantage of the program. Right now, if you use the code RENEW1, you type in RENEW1, go to heartsrenewed.org and you type in RENEW1, you'll be able to try the whole program for $1 for 7 days. So that's less than the price of a cup of coffee. So if you can't invest in that, to try that with your spouse, well, I think you got bigger problems. So check that out. So now that I've done my shout outs as we do, for those people that are wishing to contribute, I mean, if you're watching me on YouTube, I'm sure that the picture is grainy. Maybe it's not up to speed. Maybe you feel like you would like to contribute in some way. And I don't know whether it's monetary or whether it's that you're good with graphic design or video or whatnot. I'm more than open for anybody that wants to help contribute and build up this podcast. And obviously in exchange, I will promote your work. So give you a canvas to hopefully build your reputation. So for those people who want to contribute to the visual work, because I've had to move this podcast onto YouTube from the program before. So, so that's an encouragement to anybody that wants to continue to support in another way. So today we're going to be talking about panic attacks, right? So panic attacks, I think, are something that many people have experienced. I think that it's a common occurrence in our world. Right now, we are going, at least in the United States, we're going into the darker season, right? It's fall, soon it'll be winter, and the daylight is getting shorter. And a lot of people experience a lot of dysregulation and a lot of upset with the change in seasons. They have more symptoms of depression or anxiety, and some people even have this panic attack stuff. And so we're going to go through kind of what a panic attack is, talk about like what it is that you can do to mitigate that. And again, one of the things for those of you who listen to this podcast in whatever way, remember my goal is not to create problems so that I can treat them. I want to give you information so that you can communicate these things to other people that you will meet so that, we're producing therapeutic individuals, because these are problems that, I mean, a lot of people have panic attacks, but a lot of people are never educated on what to do. And trained clinicians aren't educated on what to do. They're trained on coping skills, but that doesn't get at the root of what a panic attack is and why it's happening. So I hope you stay with me as we talk about this today. Okay, so I'll start with a story. Years ago, I had a panic attack in the grocery market. Right, I was looking at some Goya beans. I don't even necessarily know why I was in that section. I just recognized that I just started to feel very uncomfortable and my breathing became very disrupted. And I started to get what we call ocular occlusion. I had like tunnel vision. I became very dizzy. And then I felt like I had to leave the store. I had to leave the grocery store. So then I went to my car. And as I left the store, I felt relieved for a bit. And then as I was driving closer to my home, I again felt that wave of dizziness and inability to breathe correctly. And I started to be concerned that I was going to die. So I pulled my car over on the side of the road. And I turned my car off, put it in park, pulled it over. And at some point, I had a panic attack, which I passed out. Obviously, the car was put in park and it was experienced safely, but it was terrifying. And panic attacks can seem like they come out of nowhere. They, oftentimes we don't recognize, what activates them. And there are different levels of activation, right? There is a physiological component, which we're going to talk about a lot today. And then there's a psychological component too. but panic attacks do happen to people. And sometimes they are physical in nature, where they are, well, I should say predominantly physical, where you feel your heart racing. But they can also be very, psychological, meaning you're driving and you just have this incredible experience of dread or fear. Your heart rate might not feel elevated or anything, but you just feel like you are going to die, or you feel like you're losing control. Some women will experience versions of panic after they have postpartum, like they'll have postpartum anxiety. So in some ways it's due to hormonal fluctuation. And then they will be experience a lot of stressors that endanger them or the life of their child. Some of it may be anything that is connected to a loss of control, like driving with your spouse, or driving, in general with somebody else, or even if you're driving yourself, like being concerned about being hurt or bad things happening. And some people have panic when they go to work, and some people have panic when they experience going to the doctor or going to the dentist, right? We have associative kind of anxiety. We have a physical change when we go to a location. So to start off, I guess, with a panic attack, right? Essentially, like I'll just go through the systems of the mind, right? So there is what we call a defend system, right? So, if you think about it like a protection system neurologically, where we're looking at the world, that bad stuff is going to happen. People are going to hurt me. People are going to reject me. People are going to injure me. So I'm in the defend mode. Everything is dangerous, right? My kids shouldn't climb that tree. They could get hurt. I got to avoid that elevator. I might get stuck there. The world is about danger and avoiding potential hazards, right? So that's the defend system. Some of us are trained into a defensive system, right? Our parents, right? A lot of our parents, especially if you grew up in the last 20 years, were very hyper protective, right? So it's kind of funny. I was listening to a comedian, and he was joking about how when he grew up, everybody he knew as a kid in your third grade class, there were casts on kids all the time. Kids were falling out of trees. Kids were getting, hurt on their bike. So you saw casts. Now you don't see a lot of casts on kids at all. You rarely see casts. Most of the injuries that young people experience now are psychological, because we're in a very hyper vigilant parenting mode. At least we have for the last 20 years, where we're protecting kids. But that also sends the message to a kid that they must be on guard. So we've produced, in our efforts of protecting kids, we've made them both fragile and enhanced their defensive system, right? They're using the defense mode more. And when we spend a lot of time in the defend mode for whatever reason, maybe because we're physically ill or run down, like we're going to talk about, or maybe we've gone through a shift, physiologically, as in pregnancy and labor and delivery, we enter into this defend mode, right? Because the body is in a weakened state or an altered state. So that's one system, the defense system. The other system, which is much more effective from a human standpoint, is the exploratory system, right? Being engaged with our environment and learning about our environment, learning about like what's going on, being able to fall down and get up, experiencing setbacks, getting knocked over, so that we have resilience. The more we have resilience in our system, and the more we're familiar with using the explore system, the less anxiety we have, and also the less likely that we're going to have some of these experiences of panic. Doesn't necessarily get rid of all of it. But so when we think about panic attacks happen because there is a surge of adrenaline. Adrenaline is something that is very helpful to the human body, because it helps us to prepare for danger, right? To send blood to our hands and to our feet and to our heart, so that we can run away from like a cheetah, or run away from some bad guy in a battlefield. Like, it gives us stimulation, right? But too much adrenaline is a bad thing, right? And so when there's a buildup of adrenaline in the body for a variety of reasons, it has to leave. Fear has to leave the body. Adrenaline has to leave the body. And oftentimes that adrenaline buildup is related to prolonged saturation of cortisol, and cortisol is a stress hormone, right? So we have cortisol on one end that is acting as a stress hormone, and adrenaline which again is stimulating the body, preparing it for action, right? But sometimes, like again, like we get adrenaline, and we get adrenaline released at like weird times, like I'm talking about at the grocery store, or while you're sitting in church, or while you're waiting in the dentist's chair. Nothing's happening. Nobody's doing anything. There's no lion there. There's nobody there with a gun. And yet you feel like you're going to die. You feel like you're losing control. And so I want you to understand this is not just always a psychological experience. There is usually a physical underpinning. So whenever we have a problem with our physical, right, or I'm sorry, whenever we have a problem in our waking state, right, like a panic attack is something you have when you are awake, right? So this is an aside now. So if you're having panic attacks while you're awake, right, like I gave you the example when I'm in the supermarket looking at Goya beans, having a panic attack there, that in many ways, obviously like that's a waking state thing. So if I'm having problems in my waking state, it's usually an issue that there's something going on in my sleep cycle, right? So if I sleep poorly, I'm going to be awake poorly. I'm going to function poorly while I'm awake. So we always, I know it sounds odd maybe, but I find it very helpful from from a scientific standpoint at least, to always study the cycle of sleep if I'm having symptoms, whether it's depression, anxiety, obsessiveness. It doesn't matter. Whatever your symptomology is, you're going to find a lot of it is correlative to your sleep. Now, if you're waking up to a panic attack, so this is an important aside, right? So if you're waking up and you're panicking, or you live with somebody, or you're sleeping next to somebody and they say that you're gasping, or you're waking up and you feel like you're dying in the middle of the night, that may not necessarily be due to a psychological reality. That may be due to sleep apnea, where you're just not breathing in the middle of the night. You need to talk to a sleep specialist. That could be that there is a heart or a lung, you might have COPD or some kind of lung or heart problem, right? Where you're actually having a primary physical issue, because your brain is just waking you up in panic. So you're not even thinking about anything. Your brain is not activating it at a conscious level. It's a body system issue. So if you're waking up to panic attacks, always important, regardless, it's always important to follow up with a doctor. But if you're waking up to panic, or waking up in the middle of the night to panic, you really want to follow up and rule out sleep apnea or any kind of congestive heart failure or pulmonary problems that you might have that are going undiagnosed. So that's just something I want as an aside, right? But if you're not sleeping correctly, what's going to happen? So when you sleep, again, your body starts to, in a healthy sense, it should be removing cortisol and producing dopamine, right? Through the sleep process. You should have dopamine being produced when you're asleep. You should feel relaxed, and you should be able to then wake up feeling rejuvenated and energized. Dopamine, that neurotransmitter dopamine, allows us to be interested in our environment, right? Interested, motivated, and to get information into our brain from the environment. So a lot of times people are like, well, I want to be more present. Well, you're not going to be very present if you don't sleep correctly. And if you don't sleep correctly for a long period of time, you're going to have a lot of cortisol. And if there's a lot of cortisol in your body for too long, again, what's going to happen is eventually the adrenaline is going to build up, right? And your body is going to become, we will say, like in layman's terms, stressed, but that has to get out. And so the more that you become stressed and the more that your body is disrupted like that, the breathing for many people gets shallower, their muscles get constricted in their chest, right? So that's why a lot of times people feel like tightness in their chest, because their breathing pattern is shallow. They're not breathing correctly, and their mind becomes more upset, right? The shallower you breathe, the more your heart has to work. So now your heart is fluttering, it's going faster than it needs to go. And that sends into your other parts of your brain that, to stimulate like this fear of, am I dying? Am I unable to breathe? Because the brain starts to believe that you're dying, right? So remember, like if you're not breathing properly, your brain starts to believe you're dying. So if we're not sleeping correctly, it's going to impair our ability to really think and breathe normally, to engage the present reality, our present experience in a normal way. and it's going to make everything very, very stressful. So with panic attacks, you're going to also see other themes, right? People feel depressed, or people feel anxious, or people might have OCD types of stuff. All of that can go together because there's a lot of different factors that kind of co-occur. And so if we think about this, so the big thing is if you're having panic attacks, you want to take a look at your sleep and make sure your sleep is regulated in an appropriate way. And how much sleep should you get? Well, technically as much as you need. What does that mean? Well, it means that you need to figure that out. In general, if you think a lot or you have a mentally exhausting type of work or life experience or life event, you need to sleep longer. And sometimes people struggle with that, right? So if you're working on your PhD thesis, if you're going through the death of a family member, you might need to sleep more. And I'll hear people say, "Well, I sleep all the time." Well, that's not really sleep. That's just being sedentary, or you're having what we call like compressed sleep. And that's just a term that means that when you sleep, you don't go into the deeper forms of REM or low wave sleep that would restore you. You're kind of still agitated. And so we want to improve your sleep. So I've done a whole podcast on sleep, how to improve it, but just in a brief way, the big things that you want to look at for sleep is number one, making sure that when you wake up, that you have put light in your eyes, right? The brain needs light information, within the first, little bit of the morning, right? So when you wake up, it's great if you can get outside for 2 to 10 minutes. That's all it takes around sunrise. It's helpful if you're outside physically. I know it's going to be dark earlier and earlier, and our daylights are getting shorter. So there are things that we call like light boxes. They look like a laptop, and they have LED lights that generate about 10,000 lux per minute, which is a great thing because it means in about 10 minutes of sitting in the presence of this light box, your brain will be activated to the same level it would be if it was able to be outside in sunlight. So many people that are shift workers or people who are going to struggle with the seasonal affective stuff, I would encourage you to take a look at these light boxes. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to check that out. But that's kind of important to get light in your eyes because it sets the clock for the brain to get into sleep. The second thing, so we want light in the eyes in the morning. We want no light in the eyes as close to bedtime as possible because blue light that comes from your phone, your tablet, your laptop, it restricts the brain's melatonin production, so it's going to make it hard for you to go to bed. So those are two things. The second mechanism for sleep is temperature, right? So if you want to wake up, you want to regulate your sleep, and also you want to kind of remove adrenaline and improve dopamine functioning, you may want to do some cold exposure in the morning. In the morning, when you wake up, you may want to put your shower for 10 seconds in the beginning to maybe cold and douse yourself with a little bit of cold water for 10 seconds. You can build that up every week by adding 10 seconds incrementally every week. So week 1, 10 seconds, week 2, 20 seconds, week 3, 30 seconds, and slowly building up to about 2 minutes. Once you get to 2 minutes, your body system should be what we call cold adapted. Now, a word of warning about this. So two things. One is this is an adaptation, and with cold water, you do not want to do this cold water stuff unless you talk to your doctor. I'm not your doctor. The big things that are forewarned for people with cold therapy stuff is you really don't want to do it if you have a seizure disorder because you don't know how your body's going to react to that. You don't want to do it if you have a cardiac issue that is unmanaged or that you have concerns for, and you don't necessarily want to do this if you're pregnant, right? Because we don't know how all of this might affect your child. So if those things don't apply to you, or you want to make sure you just talk to your doctor regardless. But the water does not need to be exhaustingly cold. I mean, you see people like Joe Rogan, putting themselves in ice baths. That's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about 60-degree water. Now, if you can do that in the morning, what it does is it elevates your body temperature. It elevates your body temperature so that you are, again, you're awake, right? Because you put the body in cold water, the body has to heat up. Heating up actually triggers in the brain that it's time to wake up. So that helps. Before bed, you may want to take a hot shower because that will lower your body temperature. Lowering a body temperature allows you to get to sleep. And so when body temperature, simple mechanism here is when body temperature goes down, the brain wants to go to sleep. When body temperature goes up, the brain stays awake. When there's light in the eyes, the brain wants to stay awake. When there's no light in the eyes, the brain wants to go to sleep, starts the sleep cycle. Okay? So those are key things for sleep. That's how the brain operates with sleep, at least. Now, if you're coming home late and you're on your phone, especially if you're on your phone from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., you're probably on target to have a panic attack soon, just because your body is up. And the National Institute for Mental Health has said that in their research, people that are on blue light activated devices from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. are what we call in a dopamine deficit. So you physiologically will not have enough dopamine to engage in the environment correctly. Your brain won't be able to engage. So you'll be anxious and depressed just waking up. And if your brain doesn't know how to get that information from the environment, it starts to go into the defense system. And going into the defense system puts us in a state of stress. So now we got cortisol, and now we got the generation of more adrenaline building in the body, and that obviously is kind of that has to come out at some place. So I want you to think that with sleep, the better you sleep, the more likely that you're processing stress appropriately, processing stressful events, integrating life experiences. Your brain produces about 80% of its new brain cells while you're asleep, okay? So if you don't sleep, it's very hard to learn effectively. It's very hard to make sense of life events, especially stressful ones, if we're not sleeping correctly. I mean, I'm not the sleep doctor, but I feel like sometimes when I talk about this, I become one. The second thing that can really help with sleep and the regulation of this stress in the body is the stability of blood sugar. And to consume, and I've done a podcast on this as well about moods and foods and all that, is to consume more proteins and fats earlier in the day so that your blood sugar is stable. If your blood sugar starts spiking, right, you wake up and you just have some Cinnabon or something, right? Some kind of like sugar bomb in the morning. And what's going to happen is your body's going to be dysregulated and you're going to be agitated, physiologically agitated. And again, if the body is stressed, you go into the defense system. And again, being in the defense system too long, your brain doesn't want to be there. So it will give you a panic attack to reset the brain, right? So imagine the more stress you get, it's like the body fills up, and eventually the body fills up with too much of these stress hormones and adrenaline that it just needs to get rid of it. And it gets rid of it through this panic, whether you pass out, whether you hyperventilate, whatever it is. The stress needs to leave the body. So consume more proteins and fats. If you're someone who's prone to anxiety or more agitations, you may want to make sure that you're eating more protein throughout the day. If your metabolism is higher or you're an athlete or a nursing mom, you want to make sure that you're trying to stabilize your blood sugar. And you're going to need proteins and fats to make hormones. Remember, to make the hormones your body needs, you need proteins and fats. If your body's filled with stress hormone, right, like cortisol and adrenaline, if it's using its nutrients to make that, it's going to have less space. It's going to have less materials to make, estradiol or, testosterone or, progesterone, whatever your body is going to need. Your body can't make that, if all of those materials are being funneled off to make more cortisol, make more adrenaline. So, and again, make sure that you're eating appropriate things. The carbohydrates, I'm not opposed to carbohydrates by any stretch. This is not a keto diet podcast or anything. Just make sure that you always pair the carbohydrates in your life with some type of protein or fat to stabilize your blood sugar so that you do not oversecrete insulin. That is a huge problem, especially as we get older, because that is what impacts our trajectory a lot of times for diabetes and a whole lot of things, Alzheimer's, you name it. So again, we're trying to stay out of this defense system, right? And so having better sleep, having stability of blood sugar allows us to be more in the explore system because our body is not stressed. I do not want my body to be physically stressed all the time. So sleep helps tremendously with that. Again, if you're not sleeping correctly, again, you're going to start to move towards a panicky kind of state, anxiety and panicky type of state. And so then the next component to this is obviously, making sure that we move the body. So movement, right? Movement. I don't want you to get caught up. A lot of people get fixated and ruminate on exercise, and maybe you have been, I don't know, out of shape for a while. You haven't done a lot of exercise. You know, that's not what this is about. It is, though, important that you understand that cortisol, which is that stress hormone, does not leave the body just by talking about it. So you call your best friend about how stressful your day was. Sure, you might feel better, but your body physically needs to get rid of the cortisol, and it gets rid of cortisol through physiological movement. So going for a walk, or the tension of muscles, tensing muscles. If you're, again, that's why weight training, if you can do it, is very powerful because it releases endorphins. The word endorphin means endogenous morphine, right? And what researchers also call like a hope molecule. Like there's molecules that produce the state and the mental experience of hope in the mind. And that happens only when we really constrict muscles, when we pick up something heavy or push something heavy. The body encourages that. It wants to make sure that we keep doing those things. The more that we are moving, it helps the adrenaline and the cortisol to kind of leave the body. Now, we can neurologically, the biomarkers for if you're getting into an anxious or depressive cycle is if you have cortisol released after 4 p.m. So if you're a shift worker, well, you know that you're already kind of somewhat screwed because your body is waking up at 7 o'clock, and your body wakes up. My body, your body, everyone's body wakes up from the hormone of cortisol. Remember, these things aren't bad. But if they're at the wrong place and wrong time of your day and your spectrum of your day, it can jack you up. So if you're waking up at 7 o'clock or 5:30 and you're agitated, just waking up, like I said, you're releasing cortisol. So you're gonna find, again, in every one of the shift work professions, high rates of really difficult stuff: depression, anxiety, divorce, alcoholism, addiction, chronic illness, because again, we're doing things that the body necessarily isn't meant to do. It's not meant to be up at night, all night. And thank God, praise God that we have people that are willing to sacrifice. And again, if you are a shift worker, this is something that you can take account for, is regulating. Remember those mechanisms I talked about with sleep, the temperature, right? The temperature of the body. And you can take that mechanism and position it where you need to, in your own life, to try to keep some equilibrium, to ward off some of the unhealthy effects of shift work. With the temperature and the light, you're just going to have to mess around with it a little bit. So this is kind of an important component. We do not want cortisol in the evening, right? So if you're a person who likes to work out, you really don't want to be working out close to bedtime, because you're going to either have you might have a lot of excitement, you might have a lot of stimulation, and then it's going to be hard for you to go to bed. So you finish your run at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock, or you're working out, well, you're not going to be able to rest. You're going to almost feel manic. You're not going to be able to settle down. And that's important, to be able to settle down. So if you're experiencing panic stuff, I would encourage you to make sure that you're increasing your movement, especially earlier or towards the time when you wake up. So if whenever you wake up, go for a walk, do some push-ups. But you want to remove the cortisol from the body. And that's a very helpful thing to kind of maintain a level that's tolerable. Remember, like if there's too much that builds up in the body, it's going to screw with things, so to speak. So, and that helps you to, again, stay in the explore system, so that you're taking in information, you're learning about what's going on in the environment, and so on and so forth, right? So these are like some of the big physical dimensions, right? Am I eating enough protein and fat? Am my blood sugar stable? Have I been sleeping properly? Those are important things because you can't control how you feel all the time. But like I said, panic is a very physiological experience. It's not just a psychological manifestation. It's almost always got a huge component of physicality to it. And this is one piece that we can grab a hold of. Because sometimes we can't control. I want you to think we can't control the mind with the mind. It's a lot easier to control the mind with the body. So I can make sure that I am off screens an hour and a half before I want to go to bed. I can make sure that I eat enough appropriate food throughout the day and remove processed foods, sugars, dairies, carbs before bed. Because again, if you do that, if you eat late at night, again, sugars, sweets, dairy, alcohol, whatever it is, you're going to start to see over time, a worse quality of sleep and then more anxiety and agitation when you wake up. The other component of this is to be mindful of how much hydration you have and the amount of electrolytes that you have in your body. If you're a person that is familiar with regular cocktail hour in the evening, you're going to notice you're going to be much more likely to have anxiety or panic stuff because you're dehydrated. Same thing for people who are, big time athletes in college or whatnot. You might not be drinking enough water. You might be dehydrated. Because if your body's very active and your mind is very active, sometimes your mind, especially if it's focused on solving a problem, if the mind is very focused on solving a problem or preparing to solve a problem, it's in the defend system, right? If it's very fixated on that, it's going to bypass the cues for hunger and thirst. So that's why we don't eat or drink enough water or eat enough food or have enough attention to our body. And then the body starts to give us like mental health or physical symptoms of anxiety or feeling lethargic or whatnot. Well, it's a side effect of our nutrition. So make sure you're hydrating. You can also do things that are going to stabilize your electrolytes. In terms of whether you want to have a little bit of Gatorade now and again, or you want to crush up, a little bit of little pink salt, Himalayan salt or something in a cup. And again, this isn't for gargling salt water. It's just to get a little bit of salt. It shouldn't be very intense at all. But we want to make sure the electrolytes are stabilized because the body, the heart, the muscles of the body, the neurons of the body need balanced metals, balanced salts and water to work properly. And a lot of times because of our diet, because of what we consume, that's off. And that also can make us very anxious. So, that's always something to work on and work out. And again, you want to talk to your doctor about what's appropriate for you. Again, I'm not your physician. So I would encourage you to take a look at electrolytes, though. You'll see sometimes people will stop behaviors, right? They will stop drinking. They will stop. Well, drinking is one example that is highly physical. If you're a person listening to this podcast and you've been drinking regularly, and if you've been drinking heavily, because some people who are anxious or have panic, they cope with that experience through consuming alcohol, right? Because alcohol relaxes you and it's a sedative. But if you stop taking alcohol every day, if you stop drinking alcohol, the body then goes through withdrawal. And the simplest form of withdrawal that we go through, obviously, is a hangover, right? A hangover happens because you're dehydrated and your body system is just it's going through the loss of alcohol. And so you might get nauseous, you might have a headache, you might feel kind of physically sick. The worst forms of withdrawal can kill you, right? So alcohol withdrawal, for those of you who might really be struggling with alcohol or want to stop, you need to be aware of the fact that you need to talk to your doctor about that or talk to a professional as well as your doctor. So, because you just can't stop cold turkey. Your body will give you anxiety symptoms. You'll have shakes. You'll have sweats. You can have a seizure. You don't want to just mess around with that. Now, that being said, right, some people will stop other behaviors as well, and the body, just like it gets adjusted to alcohol, alcohol is a pretty significant thing to get adjusted to physically. But marijuana is something that people get adjusted to. Cigarettes are something that people get adjusted to. People have behaviors that have high levels of dopamine, whether they're sexual, pornography, gambling, there are a lot of things people get involved with and ways that people cope. But whenever we take away something or we go through a really traumatic event, right? That can really screw with our sleep, right? Because a lot of times these behaviors or life events affect our sleep. That produces like an adrenal shift, right? And a cortisol shift, where we're having cortisol more at night, where I didn't used to have cortisol at night because I used to have a couple cocktails, or I used to be able to hug this person, but this person has died. You know, now I'm stressed because I go by their bedroom and they're dead, and I remember the fact that we had to bury him 2 weeks ago, and well, now you're getting more and more upset, and you're getting upset in the evening, and then into the defend mode we go, and then give it enough time, we start to have panic attacks at the weirdest of times. So again, you need to be aware of the fact that if you're going through significant alterations of behavior, going through significant alterations of life in terms of somebody has died, spouse, a friend, a parent, a child, any significant events, job changes, career changes, guys coming out of the military, leaving long-term, guys and gals leaving long-term careers, people sending their kids off away to school that they feel very close to. All of these, anything that, again, it's unique to your situation, anything that promotes a high level of shift, because the brain has to learn how to pay attention differently, and it needs to learn what to expect again, because it doesn't know what to expect. It has to, again, like, instead of being like, oh, I wonder what to expect, it's like, I hope nothing bad happens. And so, again, we want to try to stay out of that defense system. So just realize that if that's happening, that's a normal experience. But again, we want to make sure that we are dedicated to sleep, dedicated to movement. And psychologically, it becomes helpful to have structure in place, structure in terms of a schedule or routine, so that we're not left to points where we have to make decisions. If you have to make decisions in lieu of a large behavior change or a large life event, decisions produce stress. Every time you make a decision, it draws on the blood glucose of the brain. And if you have to make a lot of decisions, right, all at once, or you're having to make decisions and it's really stressful, remember all that glucose, brain, consumes all the blood glucose, and then the brain fills with cortisol, and then the brain wants dopamine. And so we either do pleasureful things to get that dopamine to clear out the cortisol. And the dopamine either comes through, like, again, like I said, movement, sleep. Sometimes the pleasurable things that we do or overdo, those things can be, really, they can be very helpful. They can also be very harmful. We can offset these stress responses, though, by a routine that removes the need to make decisions, right? Because once I have a routine, I can relax again, and I'm not building up a level of stress. I know what I'm going to do when I get home. I know what I'm going to do after I'm done with my job, or what I'm going to do when I get home to that empty house. What am I going to do? And I'm going to be able to continue to move the fear away. So remember, like, if I'm in the defense system for any length of time, the fears that my body's experiencing in that environment needs to move out of the body. One of the ways it's going to move out of the body is through movement. The second way that fear leaves the body physiologically is through breathing. So that's why a lot of people like to run, or they lift weights, or they do Tai Chi, or they do forms of meditation. And neurologically, the best form of calming the body system down, believe it or not, according to all of the research, is to do a sigh, like a giant sigh, right? So when you see people that exhale, that deep exhale down lowers the heart rate very quickly. So breathing in through the nose and being able to exhale down, that sigh calms the heart rate. And getting into a pattern where you learn how to breathe like that, it's what we call systemic breath work, connecting the body systems. It allows us to stay relaxed. And so, behaviors, meditations, exercises that engage the breath will help to calm the body system down. So there we go. Like, in terms of breaking down, like, how to reduce our tendency to have a panic attack, is number one, we want to try to keep our brain out of defend mode and maintain explore mode, keep our brain able to be present in the moment. Well, how do we do that? We do that through the regulation of sleep, sleep being controlled by light and temperature, making sure that every day we're consuming the right things for our body, avoiding inflammatory foods, maintaining a stability of blood sugar, that we're, every day we're moving the body so that fear and the adrenal and cortisol levels are regulated so that they're not building up, because the fear needs to leave the body, right? I mean, sometimes when I teach, martial arts and different types of fighting stuff, I always tell people that all the fighting, if you think about all the fighting, styles, with the exception of one that I'm familiar with, all of them, fear comes into the hands, right? The hands go up, right? Fear has to leave the body. So we need to get it out of our body. We need to get these stressors out and really being deliberate with our movement every day, psychologically producing structure, right? That is one thing, right? Routine, especially if we're going through transition in terms of, a stress event, whether it's a trauma, whether it's a difficulty, whether it's a behavior that we're changing or cutting out, because that produces stress. As we move, from one experience to another, we want to get rid of the need for decisions. So the routine is a key component. And so that's a really big deal. Now, one last thing that I wanted to give you, we we notice this in the research on blue zones. Blue zones, if you're not familiar with that term, it means the places in the world where people live the longest, right? So people live the longest in certain parts of the world, like above 100 centenarians, meaning like people that live beyond 100 years, right? So one of those zones that they find is in Costa Rica, and one of the things that I find fascinating is when they correlate the level of longevity and how people manage stress in that part of the world in Costa Rica, is that they have this reliance, this surrendering perpetually to God, right? And I think this is a fascinating thing, is to really let go of things, right? To be able to, well, God is going to take care of it. And there's this abandonment. And one thing that I would challenge people, if you struggle with panic, again, we all have a desire to deal with fear in different ways. If you have fear, though, you will have attachment. And if you have attachment physically, you'll have tension. And tension means you will have physical, psychological stress. It's important to figure out how to be open and relaxed. And so from a spiritual dimension, being able to let go and being able to really move those things away and to be able to trust and abandon those things to God. If you have been responsible for what you can control, being able to allow God to take care of the rest. And that allows us to have the ability to remove stress and cortisol from the body, because we're not going to overthink about things. We're not going to ruminate on things as much, because we will have known we have been responsible to the situation at hand, and that whatever we've done is enough, and that we are going to trust God with the rest. So these are, I guess, a quick breakdown of ways to assist if you're going through panic attacks. And again, if you're physically having a panic attack of any sort, or your friends are, always rule out a biological, physical experience, whether it be a heart condition, a blood condition, a hormone thing. Sometimes people will have thyroid conditions that also have a production of panic experiences or hormonal abnormalities. Always follow up with your doctor, but go out and, if you can, share this with somebody that might benefit from it, and smuggle some hope wherever you can. Thank you.